I used to think stories like these were pretty limited to just a few spots with very low population density. But it's starting to sound like these things don't care that much how many people are around. As a park ranger, I've worked in quite a variety of places. I had never seen something I couldn't explain, though. When I saw this creature I'm going to tell you about, I was living in Texas. It was about 5 years ago, and I was working as a park ranger in Big Bend National Park. I would sometimes do talks and presentations for visitors. It was one of my favorite parts of working in that field. Big Bend has a great history. It has mixed high desert and smaller mountains. It's just a gorgeous place. It's in the western part of Texas that goes downward along the bend of the Rio Grande on the border of Mexico. It was early in the summer, and I was preparing for a backpacking series presentation. I needed to get some pictures, and I decided to hike out near the area around Santa Elena Canyon. That part of the park opens into a pretty flat area of the basin where the river gets wide. It was in the late afternoon. I like to get those golden hour photos. There tends to be more diverse wildlife around there. I had parked my truck a distance away in a lot that serviced the trailhead. I had spent plenty of time there in the past. I was approaching the river basin near the mouth of the canyon when I saw something that looked unusual. Something was moving on the other side of the river, and it was big. My brain was scrambling, trying to figure out what category of creature it was. At first I thought mountain lion, but I knew instinctively that wasn't it. It was the size of a large man, but it was moving along really low to the ground. It was like a dark tan color, and it really struck me because of the way it was moving. It was like it had a bulk similar to a deer or something, but it was moving like a snake, like serpentine. Obviously, big mammals don't move like that, so I just kept staring at it, trying to make it out better. I kept moving back and forth, trying to get a good line of sight on it, and when I finally got a pretty clear view, I felt like my blood froze. I couldn't even identify what it was. It was very scrawny looking and really pale. It looked hairless and very humanoid, but it was creeping along low to the ground. I got the impression that it was hunting something. I could probably have thrown a rock across the water and hit it. It seemed to be totally focused on something off in the bushes. I stayed completely still so that I wouldn't make any noise. But then it turned its head and looked at me. It had these huge black eyes, and the mouth was hanging open in this creepy way. When it saw that I had seen it, it hunkered down even lower and seemed to scoot back, trying to hide. I managed to take a few photos, but I was so frozen in fear, all I could think about was surviving. I've never been so thankful for a river in my life. Even though the river was pretty low at the time due to drought, I'm sure there were some points that could be crossed without too much trouble, but it was still quite wide and at least provided a psychological safety barrier. The thing started to swivel its head back and forth like it was looking between me and its original prey. I felt like it was sizing me up and trying to decide if I was worth the risk of hunting down. My heart was pounding, but I maintained my forward-facing direction. I started to slowly back away. Then its gaze fixated on me and it started making this weird clicking sound. I was terrified that it had chosen me to be its dinner that night. I'll never forget that part. Just waiting for it to decide which direction it was going to choose. I don't know if it decided I wasn't worth it, or if the river was too much of a barrier, or what. But I could feel that moment when it almost seemed to lose interest in me, and went back to stalking whatever was over there hiding in the bushes. I was able to get back to the truck without feeling that I was being pursued. But it still felt like one of the longest walks I've ever taken, even though it wasn't very far. When I got back to my truck, I didn't even leave right away. I felt like I just wanted to stay there and watch out of my window in case it had decided to follow me. My brain was desperate to know what it was. I was honestly wishing it would reappear at that point so I could try to get pictures of it from the safety of my truck. I'll always remember being parked there, listening to the occasional sounds of the typical wildlife I was used to hearing. I stayed until it got completely dark, but I never saw a sign of anything out of the ordinary. I reported the sighting, but it probably sounded like gibberish, and my photos were crap. I'm pretty sure I was shaking like a leaf when I took them. I never saw something like that again, but it took a long time before I felt at all comfortable out there. That thing looked like something out of a nightmare. I really enjoy hiking. I like finding cool things on the trails. Stones, leaves, mushrooms, little pieces of bark, and even tiny insects and things like that. It helps me clear my mind to do things out in nature. So when the weather is right, or if I start to feel a bit antsy, I'll go for a stroll. It was May, so we started getting a lot of rain. It's one of my favorite smells, so I'd usually hold out until I saw the clouds in the sky. My friend was supposed to meet up with me that day, but they weren't feeling well. I didn't want to sit inside, so I decided that I knew the trail enough to go out on my own. I had done it plenty of times before, going on the trail alone, and it would give me more time and space to let my mind be free. I put on my raincoat and boots. I grabbed my satchel so I might be able to collect some fun things, and I headed out the door. The trail wasn't a far drive. It was just a few miles from where I lived. As soon as I saw the trees, my heart was filled with joy. I'd get really excited about seeing that trail before everything. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. I pull into the parking area. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave anything important behind. So I checked my back seats and glove compartment. I typically bring a water bottle, flashlight, and a pocket knife. You know, just in case. I grabbed this stuff and a compact umbrella because I had been hoping for rain. I shoved all of it into my satchel and I headed onto the path. It had rained the day before, so I could still smell the wet leaves and dirt. The ground was pretty slippery, but once you get going, you kind of get used to it. This particular trail was known for having lots of wildlife. I had seen plenty of birds, a few snakes, some squirrels and raccoons, and once I saw a deer. I hadn't seen anything super threatening. Well, other than the snakes. I hate snakes. But nothing like a wolf or anything like that. Nobody seemed to be on the trail that day or the day before. I didn't see any footprints in the mud. To be fair, it was rather early in the morning when I went. Maybe earlier than the average person would like to go for a hike. But it didn't deter me at all. I knew the trail, like I said. The clouds were definitely getting more and more dark as I hiked. I could tell that I'd get what I'd asked for. Honestly, looking back at it all, I do regret it. I started to feel tiny raindrops fall onto my hair. I took out my umbrella. It wasn't pouring yet, but you could count on it getting to that point in the matter of seconds. I also took that moment to take out my water bottle. I took a drink and sort of held out the bottle to collect some of the rainwater. Some people freak out in these conditions, but I was completely at ease. It feels refreshing to me. So I'm just soaking up the environment and the ambiance when I hear a strange sound in the distance. It sort of sounded like a weird high-pitched shrieking. So I looked around. I thought maybe it was a deer, but I'm not a wildlife expert. It could have been something else, or it could have been nothing at all. And with the rain that started to pick up, I could have just been hearing normal noises. It was a little muffled, and it sounded a ways away from me. I didn't see anything, so I packed up my water bottle and continued walking. My umbrella was up, so the sound of the rain was pretty loud around my head. But I kept hearing something moving in the woods off to my right. So I'd stop and look and listen. I was naive, I suppose. Too trusting. I kept brushing it off. The rain is knocking some branches around. Because that's what it sounded like. Branches being disturbed. There was a point when the sounds got more intrusive. I did start to panic a little. Mostly I had this feeling like the sound was following me. So my mind started creating theories. Was there some stalker person following me? Did they know where I lived? I was scared. But I was scared of the wrong thing. I halfway expected to see a creepy person or a bear. That's not what I saw at all. As I'm looking around to identify what is making all of the ruckus, I notice to my right something moving. My focus is entirely on this one particular tree. The trunk of the tree is decently thick, and there's plenty of branches on it. But I started to realize that some of the branches I had been looking at weren't really branches at all. They were antlers. My heart kind of relaxes. It's just a deer following me through the trees. No big deal. I take my eyes off of it. I turn back towards the path and take a couple steps when I hear something behind me. Let me just say that what I had seen before was not a deer. It was now standing by the closest tree to my back in the right. It was basically on the path, but it was standing up like a human does. Its legs weren't human, though. They looked more like deer legs with hooves. Its body almost looked like it could easily camouflage with a tree because it seemed very, frail. It looked like its limbs could have been branches because of how thin they were. It literally looked like part of the tree. The only thing that helped me realize that I wasn't looking at a tree, other than the quick movement, were its eyes that seemed to glow kind of like an animal's eyes in the dark, and the weird deer skull that it was wearing on top of its face. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I didn't even have time to grab my pocket knife. I don't know if I trust my eyes, if I'm being completely honest. It all happened so fast. In 2020, I was moving cattle from New Mexico to Texas after selling part of my herd. I had one cow that was just refusing to be caught, so I went with an unconventional method of catching her. I decided to wait till she was asleep and sneak up on her with a rope. It was a little past midnight on August 4th, and I was heading out into the pasture on my ATV hunting her down. I found her asleep and standing up near the watering hole, so I parked the ATV so I could walk up on her with less noise. Just as I was getting close, though, I heard something pounding in the dirt behind me. I turned and looked, and there it was. I could only really see it by the light of the moon, but it looked like a human, twisted around, walking on all fours with its knees pointed backwards. It looked at me with glowing eyes, and I jumped back, startled at the sight. I took off on foot back to my four-wheeler. I figured I'd find another way to catch the old cow. I wasn't going to spend another minute out there with that thing. The whole way out of the pasture, I could see it in my peripherals running alongside me. Fortunately, I finally did manage to get away, but when we went out after the cow the next morning, she'd been just about picked clean. All that was left were her bones, laid out bleaching in the summer sun. My mom saw the same thing on the same property back in 1979. She had retired from barrel racing in the rodeo, but still enjoyed working horses, and was out running one she'd just broke through that same field one evening when the skinwalker chased her. Just like with me, she said it looked like a twisted human with glowing yellow eyes. She and Dad divorced not long after that because she wanted to sell the land and leave, but he refused. After all, it's a generational ranch. In 1966, my grandfather had also seen the skinwalker there. They were putting up a new barn on the northeasternmost corner of the ranch, and my grandpa had stayed out late to finish up some interior work after the lights were finally installed. He had both barn doors open with a breeze blowing through the middle of the barn as it was a hot summer night, and he was wanting all the fresh air he could get while hanging stall doors. As he was working, he felt something creep up beside him and thought it was his dog, a German shepherd he called Martin. He reached out to pet Martin but didn't feel him there, so he looked to see where he was. That's when he saw the skinwalker in the same form me and my mom saw standing in the middle of the barn hallway staring right at him. He screamed, and the skinwalker left, but Grandpa searched all over the ranch and never did find Martin. Years later, we'd find a dog skeleton laid out in a field. The bones were broken up like something had eaten it. In 1947, my great-grandmother Iris was hanging clothes in the backyard at the ranch when her dog, Maddie, went to barking and howling at something over the horizon. When she looked out to see what they were barking at, it was a great big bear, not something a person would expect to see out here in New Mexico. She called the dogs and the kids, and they ran inside, and she watched as the bear crept up closer to the house. They didn't have a telephone, so she couldn't call for help. She sent the kids to hide under their beds, and she pushed a hope chest up against the door, hoping to keep the bear out. She heard the thing grunting and circling the house, pawing at the sides and scratching the glass of the windows, but she curled up in a ball and hid under the shelves in the pantry until the noise stopped and it left. Afterward, when her husband got home, they took a walk outside together to check on the damage. There wasn't a whole lot, but they found something even more startling. At one point, while circling the house, the bear's footprints began to change. By the time it left the homestead and took off back over the hill, the bear prints had changed into almost human-like tracks with elongated fingers and toes and a sharp claw poking holes in the ground at the end of each. The first reported sighting of a skinwalker in my family, though, was when my great-great-grandfather first bought the land in 1919, and he saw it many, many times. He built the original house by hand and camped out in a tent on the land every night until the house was built. In his journal, he wrote about the skinwalker circling his camp often at night, watching the glow of the fire from a distance. He made peace with the skinwalker by leaving offerings of meat out for it at the top of the hill at the end of the valley, and every time the ranch has changed hands through the years, it's come with a warning about the skinwalker being here. Now, after what happened with the cow, my family is wanting to leave, but it's a generational ranch. Just like my dad, I can't bring myself to give it up so easily. All I can do is teach my kids about the skinwalker that lives here and how to protect themselves when it's their turn to face it down.